sister, I am so honored to have today's two guests on with me. They are Michael and Monica Berg, who, what do you call yourself? You run the Kabbalah Centre, you head up the Kabbalah Centre.
That's part of, yes, we don't,
Worldwide.
that as well, yes.
Co-directors, we usually call it, but more than that, I don't know.
We see ourselves hopefully as people who inspire people.
Mm-hmm. And that you really do. I have to tell you that I listen to every single episode of your podcast, which I don't think it's easy to listen to every single one. You really have to be invested in the journey and the way that people speak. And firstly, your guys' banter is just amazing and hilarious and so good. It like brings so much levity to the topics. But there's so much meat and juice in every single episode. So if you guys haven't checked out Spiritually Hungry, instead of asking you to just rehash every nugget that I've gotten from that episode, I'll just tell everyone, just go and listen to Spiritually Hungry, because it's really a needle moving type of podcast. So you two have obviously had a massive impact on my life, and for decades, and going into a decade and a half now. And so I'm going to ask you something that I think I am curious and my audience is curious to know about, which is that, we're going through a very challenging time, and everybody sort of is aware of that. And the pressure and the challenges and all of that stuff really feels like it's sort of amping up. And I was thinking to myself the other day, well, I can imagine that there's obviously a lot of emphasis in the spiritual world of manifestation, right? So manifesting your dream, this home, job, life, partner, whatever. But what we don't often talk about is, and something we say on here a lot, is that, becoming your real self is the ultimate manifestation. So what I wanted to know from you guys is that obviously you have your own challenges, and the creator is sending you exactly what it needs to be sending you to help you grow. But after being in this consciousness for so long, what is different about your everyday that is the proof of the fact that you've done the work, right? Like, how does someone who is met with the daily life stuff feel different in their daily life? Because that's a part that we miss, right? Like, if we still don't feel different no matter what comes at us, then it doesn't matter what we've manifested, quote unquote, on paper. And I'm so curious to find out, you are so far down the line, what does it look like that's different than when you started in your lives?
Yeah.
Well, it's funny, when you started the conversation, you're like, it's a really difficult time and things are so trying. And I thought for a second, wait, is it? And I think that that's the point, right? I think when you're making this a daily practice in terms of expanding consciousness, in terms of embracing, and more than that, seeking change, in terms of working on becoming a person who sees the purpose in everything, right? The process is the purpose. So when you start to really live like that, then each day when you wake up, and we both do this, I think, in different ways, but definitely do it every day, wake up with the consciousness and really ask, we call it the creator, but something higher, you can call it God or energy or light, to be the most powerful version of ourselves that we can be, and to be completely connected to that light force, so that no matter what happens, the things that you plan for, the things that you certainly didn't plan for, things that you anticipate, things that you don't, that you are able to see the gift in it. And therefore, at the end of the day, you look at the day, and if somebody said, well, was there anything challenging, or did something bad happen today? It wouldn't even be like a thought, because that's not in the realm of what you're living in. But it's a constant practice, and I think that's the point. We can have goals, we can want to manifest things, we can be successful, we can look great on paper, but in terms of living a happy and fulfilled life where everything feels purposeful, especially the things that wouldn't to most people, that's really why we came here, right? And that only is able to, that fulfillment that we seek is only able to be felt and really lived when you wake up and you remind yourself to have that consciousness, and therefore live it.
Yeah, and I would say this is probably one of my most exciting topics to speak of, because one of the things that I literally almost every time I speak or I share, I always try to put it with a test, which meaning that if this wisdom, if this teaching works, it means that you should be able to test its efficacy in life. So the biggest question I always ask myself, and I ask anybody who listens to me to ask themselves, whatever spiritual path you're on, whether you're on it for a day, for a week, for a month, for 20 years, do you feel the change? And what does that mean? That something that a year ago, 5 years ago, would have upset you, today doesn't even move you. Or take it to the other extreme, makes you happy. And that this might be the most important test of whether we are actually on a proper spiritual path, whichever one we are on. But if you can say to yourself, on the whole, I handle things better, which means, again, what upset me, this same thing, if it happened last year, would have been devastating. Today, I'm okay with it. Or even better, today I'm so excited about it. That's the true test of spiritual path. I do think that in our world today, there's such a plethora of spiritual paths, but I don't know if we're asking the right questions of ourselves all the time. And I think this is probably the most important one. And if it's not, I always say, and if the answer is no, then stop. Don't continue on that path expecting, 20 years that's going to get different. If your spiritual path is not transforming, and again, maybe not in the first second, right? But after a week, after a month, after a year, you should be able to say to yourself, this situation I handle so differently and to the extreme. And this is where I can, I ask myself these questions. I actually enjoy them. And it leads to another important understanding, which is, I always say that I'm so thankful that I don't direct my own life. Now, most of us make the mistake of thinking that we do. Obviously, we don't. You don't have to be a spiritual person to know that there's so many things that happen in our lives, that are going to happen in our lives. The majority of them, and certainly many of the big things, are not going to be things that we controlled, not even necessarily things we brought into our lives. So if you're a spiritual person, you're actually appreciative of the fact that there's a greater force helping you grow. That's the only thing what we call the light of the creator, that universal force. It's there for one purpose, to help me grow, to help me change. And ultimately, those things which I even didn't want or maybe would not have wished for that come into our lives, assuming you accept them and see them in their pure spiritual purpose, they're the most exciting, most beneficial things that happen to you in life. But that's where the spiritual work comes in, and that's where the spiritual path is important.
But it's really a different way of living, because I think sometimes people have a spiritual practice and it really makes them feel better about the way they live their lives. Like, yeah, I'm a good person. I'm thinking about things. I'm a thoughtful person. I'm a conscious person. I'm even a sharing person. But this idea, and I think that's why the question's so great, it's, the idea of real change, right? Transformative change, that you come into the world one way and you leave very, very differently. And that has to be a daily discipline, right? It's not something that we kind of just do by the way as a practice among many other things. And by the way, it's one of the hardest things to do and to live, because what we see in social media, what we see all around us, there's so many different definitions of success, and people act like they have it all. Like, I'm a good person, I'm a spiritual person, I'm a rich person, I'm all these things, and we really never know. And so this is about really, does your internal match your external? What you are living day to day externally, whatever that looks like, is it really connected to your internal, which is soul, which is leading from that place of truth, in being honest with yourself about where you're at, where you want to be, and then taking the steps to get there.
I mean, you're bringing up so many amazing points here. And I remember, I think it was you, Monica, who said, I heard you say this probably 7 years ago, that the goal is you kind of want to not be able to recognize yourself. And that's how, to Michael's point, like, you want to have this tangible receipt of, if I've tried the certain path, how do I know that it's working? Because sometimes if it stops just at the head, when you first come to spirituality, there's a relief and there's a promise and there's a hope with just consuming the information. And which is great, and you probably need that first nugget, right? But if it it doesn't get progressed past that, you can spend years in just getting addicted to the concepts and actually not feeling any sort of more levity, more openness, more, joy for being alive, more of that kind of cherishing that this is like a once in a universe lifetime opportunity. All of those things that sort of are supposed to be sort of naturally like a felt sense rather than a forced from the mind sense. And so I love that you said, Michael, that if you can't measure it, like, stop it because it's not working for you.
It really should be, as because as you were speaking, I was thinking about this analogy. Like, I opened up one of the books I had written, and I read a chapter, and I thought, well, that's an incomplete thought. I would write that completely different. In fact, I added a whole nother section to it. It should be that obvious, right? Like the things that you thought about, the things, even how you understood spiritual concepts, or what you would have done a year ago, it should seem so foreign to you. Like, wait, that I said that, like I did that. We have to be unrecognizable to ourselves, certainly year to year. But I would even say, like, if you really are crushing it, almost daily, right? I mean, somebody came to me not that long ago, and they were like, "Do you remember 10 years ago? You told me this, and whatever I said." Well, it sounds like me. I would say it that way, but I said that because I was just a different person, right?
And to Monica's point, I think it's really important. Like when I think about myself, and I think about who I am today, where I am today, my hope is that next year, 5 years from now, again, I am a completely different person, a better version of myself. And for me, that's probably maybe the most exciting part of a true spiritual path, is that everything is new all the time because you're changing so completely all the time. And whether it manifests in relationships or just it manifests in your daily joy, this is, I think, probably the greatest promise of a spiritual path, is that you can be more excited today than yesterday. Monica and I get to be at many, many weddings. We've done hundreds and hundreds of ceremonies. and one of the things that I always say at a wedding is that, when people go on their first date, they're usually very excited. And usually the first year is exciting, right? You won't often find a relationship into the 10th year or 20th year that is exciting, right? But the reality is that it should be, that life should be more exciting every single day if you're growing and you're changing. A relationship should be more exciting every day if you're growing and you're changing. And I think, and again, like I said, I could talk about this a lot because this is one of my favorite topics.
We talk about this.
But there's a one ancient word, which is my favorite word in Kabbalistic teachings, but it's also found in many, if not all, of the ancient traditions, and is the word Ein Sof, which means endless. And that when we talk about what people call God or the Creator, we don't really know very much about that force. We know one thing, that it's endless and limitless. And if your spiritual path is getting you in touch with that universal force, your life should be an experience of endless all the time.
I mean, we often get really excited about making new friends and meeting people or finding our soulmate and who am I going to meet next? What's life going to show me? But imagine if we had that enthusiasm about meeting who we're yet to become, right? Meeting ourselves. We should be excited about the we will become, who we will meet in of ourselves. We feel comfortable in our own skin then, and we are never lonely ever again because you have such a great deep connection and appreciation for who you are and all that you can become and be.
It seems to me that when you're talking about this concept, there's so many people, there's that cliche of living life to the full is jumping out of planes and visiting every country in the world. But there's something about this that is so revolutionary because you get to live different lifetimes, which are higher and higher experiences, the longer you're here, if you're doing it this way. And so you can, take the take the example of me yesterday on an 11-hour flight, with something that used to bother me so much and probably has my entire life. And not only do you see the humor in the creator sending you something when you know exactly why it's there, but you can't help but laugh, like at your own. It's a much more sort of tender approach to self when you can realize that, like, overcoming yourself is not from a place of, because I have to do it and that's my task in this life, and it's not kind of self-flagellation. It's selfish. Like, you want to feel not worried. You want to not feel controlling. You want to not feel heavy and down and upset by everything. Like those are also selfish motives because it makes a good life.
What was it that upset you? Was it fear of flying, or was it like something on the plane that it
No.
sounds like an interesting story?
It was a man who was coughing the entire 11 hours, and it came with like a nervous tick too. So the whole flight was just a very, very loud ongoing experiences. And for some reason, I actually don't know what the root of it is, but people coughing in public is a real thing for me. I don't know why. And so I was kind of just like playing in my mind of like imagining going over there and telling him like, can you just stop that and pull yourself together? And that just started making me laugh. Like that was my previous reaction. And then I thought to myself, okay, well, maybe this guy is going to help me sleep really well tonight because I'm not going to nap on the plane. And maybe, who knows, maybe he's really sick, or maybe he's really nervous and that's a nervous habit he has. Like, and so once you kind of can get there, it takes the heaviness and the like the bitterness out of the actual thing. And then I'm sitting there having a better time because of just that mental exercise I had with myself.
It reminds me of one of my favorite stories to tell. And this goes back a number of years when we were flying.
Sticky drink? Yeah.
We were flying from LA to New York. And I was getting into my seat. I finally sat down. I was on the aisle. And a guy and people were coming past, boarding the plane. And there was a guy who was putting up his stuff about, in the overhead cabin. He had a big, venti,
venti Starbucks.
Sticky Starbucks drinks.
Caramel macchiato, whatever.
And as he's struggling to put his luggage on, his cup falls out of his hand and it pours all over me. And of course, my first thought is, oh my God, for the next 6 hours, I'm going to have to be sitting with sticky clothes. The second thought I had was, well, this is from the creator. And even though I can't understand why, I know that it's absolutely for my benefit. So I actually became excited and happy that I was going to spend the next 6 hours in sticky clothes. And it's that I would call spiritual exercise transforms life, because again, I had two choices. I could spend the next 6 hours upset, disappointed, uncomfortable, or I could spend the next 6 hours just appreciative of the fact that for reasons I can't tell right now, the light of the creator is telling me this is the best for your soul and for your development. So embrace it and enjoy it. And I actually did enjoy it.
My first thought was, because I was standing right next to him, I was like, oh my God, I'm so happy he missed me. And then the story gets better because the flight attendant was like, oh my God, I have something that's going to soak it right up. I'll be right back. She comes back with maxi pads and she starts wiping his shirt. And I'm like, oh my God, this is for my amusement as well.
It's such a high when you can overcome this like thing that you thought was just a part of you and you kind of accepted it because it's gotten crustier the longer it stayed there. And then one day you're like, oh, I didn't even realize that was something that, it didn't have to remain.
And actually, I think it's related to a very important understanding that we cause most of our own pain.
That's a hard one for people to own.
But it's true. Most of the times that we're upset, disappointed, angry, it's not because of what is necessarily happening, because you can choose to react one way or the other. It's the choice that we are making to become angry at this situation, to become upset at this situation.
The thing is, people gave away their power long ago. Most people feel helpless in situations because for whatever reason, that's become their belief system, right? That's what's so empowering about spirituality. You actually realize that you have all the answers you'll ever need to any problem, and you are so incredibly powerful. You just have to use your power, which most don't.
Right. And I think, but the idea is that if you're truly on a spiritual path and you understand that, you can reduce, the individual with their own strength and consciousness can reduce by 90% the amount of pain and upset and disappointment that one can experience. And of course, that takes work and discipline, but that's the promise. That's the promise of a spiritual path.
And you really get to see how custom and how loving the universe is by the fact that you can start to make the connections, right? Of like, oh, I got sent this because it's trying to show me this one other place where I didn't feel like I was powerful. And of course it would send me, someone coughing for 11 hours or, all the other things that, challenge or are brought to us in the, one after the other. There's a reason why. It's almost like the sorting hat in Harry Potter. Like, you're getting the ones you're getting because they're your ones that you have to see.
Absolutely. And they're perfect for you, right? I think it's both of those ideas that, right, it's not a coincidence that this exact situation is coming into my life and it's perfectly designed for me, right? That person coughing was not coughing because they were coughing. They were coughing, or at least you heard them coughing because your soul needed that for your process and for your perfection.
And here's the thing, I think for your listeners, it's important to know this. It's not something that is automatic, this way of thinking. It takes years of kind of, first of all, a decision to start to see life in this way, and then actively choose that every day until it becomes automatic. And I remember when it started to shift for me, I almost felt like I was in a parallel universe. Like, I could recognize that my ego wanted to feel a certain way about something, and I'm like, well, and then at the same time I started to say, okay, but you know what, benefit of the doubt, it's not really about you, this is what's going on, what are you going to choose to give energy to? And now it's more automatic, and for sure it's the latter. But at first, the ego's in control for most of us, unless we choose something else, and it doesn't like to be slighted, it doesn't like to be wrong, it doesn't like to be ignored. But when you start to allow your mind, really your heart, to open and see through somebody else's lens what that experience might be there, not only what's going on with them, but what could it be for you, then you start to see things really clearly, right? In true eyes. But again, I think that it doesn't happen automatically, and people should know, everybody, when they start out and they choose this, everybody goes through that kind of like, but I want to stay in this comfort zone of like, I'm right and I want to be angry, but then you're not happy.
Yeah. And it's just, you're, like you said, you're the one who's creating your own pain. You're like, well, hold on a second, I could get mad at this, but then I'm going to have that feeling hangover, right? Of being someone who's mad. Like, I don't want that. That's not fun. Like, let's just preserve every single moment of life as if it's like a beautiful moment. And so I want to ask you about this ego thing, because this is, to me, one of the most transformative parts of studying Kabbalah. And a lot of my listeners will know about the sort of ego stuff. But it's almost like it's ongoing, because no matter how long you've tried to, let's say, not identify with that first voice that comes up, which is usually the ego voice, there's always more layers too. So it's not that there's not this promise of you get there and then you can chill.
Absolutely. I mean, one of my favorite stories of an ancient Kabbalist is he was on his deathbed and his students gathered around him. And they asked him, how do we choose our next teacher? How do we choose the person after you leave this world who will teach us? He says, any person you're thinking might be your teacher, ask him one question. How do I get rid of my ego completely? And anybody who gives you an answer, they're not their teacher. Because you can never completely remove your ego. It's a lifelong, continuous process of diminishing that voice. But while we are in this physical body, we are actually meant to live that struggle with the ego, hopefully progressing to higher levels. But that struggle is ever constant.
And it's hard also because when you start to be introspective about things and you give yourself emotional feedback, and why did this happen? Was this my ego? Was it not? I'm going to apologize. I'm going to own it. Sometimes you feel kind of like a pushover. Wait a second, but I also want to have, clarity. I want to be heard. Like, it's not always, the ego's tricky, right? Even if we're calling it out, then sometimes you feel like there's not a balance. I think it ultimately comes to, where is your ego most invested? Is it to be liked? Is it to be respected? What are you seeking, right? And in that area, and to really, really see it for what it is. And I think that most people tend not to be honest with themselves, because a lot of this kind of change is difficult. So if we lie to ourselves, we can continue on the way we are. We don't have to do this hard work of change. But I think the first thing is to be honest with yourself. And I think we have these conversations all the time. Something will happen, and I'll say, I recognize this is ego. But however, there is this other point. Let's talk about it. I mean, I think it's important to be able to have somebody that you really trust in that way, because it can take a hold of anybody at any given time. There are no days off. It doesn't matter how spiritual you become. It doesn't matter how much you share. The ego keeps coming back for more. And it will be in a different area. You might figure it out in this one area, let's say in the relationships, and then suddenly now it's happening at work, or it's happening with your sibling, or, it's going to come. It's like, okay, I'm not getting heard here. I'm going to move over here into this category.
And in many ways, it's a great sign. Like, it's such a blessing. Like, oh, thank you for always being there and showing me where there's more, becoming to do. But this actually leads me so beautifully to another one of your concepts that I think is life-changing, which is about being a friend to yourself. Because in those moments, like you said, there's parts of it that are probably beautiful, and other parts that are egoic, right? So like wanting to be seen is a lovely thing to an extent. So even as you're saying that, I'm thinking about yesterday, like, oh, when I try to understand why the part of me that was okay feeling that way is like, oh, you know what? It's just a really long travel day for you. And it's okay that you wanted to feel peaceful and you maybe wanted to have a nap. And that's fine. And there's still space for that desire that is now probably going to be thwarted. But there's also not beating yourself for your egoic behaviors with like a shame stick. And seeing the not so nefarious sometimes motivation behind those things. So can you talk more about being a friend to yourself? Because I think that is absolutely life-changing when we're confronting things about not who we really are deep down, but the shell that might not be so pleasant to look at.
So I think, again, one of my more favorite topics to speak about, but it begins with an understanding that you, each one of us, each one of our listeners, they are perfect. Your soul is pure, light, connectedness. There's nothing negative about us, ever. Even if and when we behave in negative ways, that's like, one could say a stain on a shirt, right? It's not part of the shirt. The shirt can go to dry cleaning. The shirt can be washed. It's not who I am. And no matter what we ever do, even the worst thing we've ever done, it has never damaged who we are. It might have put, like you said, a shell upon it, sort of, maybe diminished our sense, our ability to sense our perfection and greatness, but it never damages it. And I think that's a very important thing we need to all accept. Every single one of us is perfect, complete light. And we can never, no matter how hard we ever try, damage that. We will never be anything less than completely beautiful and perfect souls. We can do actions that put layers upon that, and then it's harder to see who we are and when connect to who we are, but we're never, ever damaged.
But we can energetically fall backwards and cover.
That's all we can ever do.
Right.
Cover our light. But never damage our light.
To the point where it looks dark. And then, of course, you have the choice or the ability to peel back the layers and reveal the light again.
Yeah. I mean, the parable that Kabbalah is often used is the fact that if you have a lamp, right, and it's shining in the room, and then you put, a blanket over it, now the light is much more diminished. You put another blanket, and now it may be completely dark in the room. You haven't touched the bulb or the light emanating from it.
It never changed.
You've just covered, you just covered it. And if we view ourselves that way, then the ego or any terrible action we've ever done should never influence how we view ourselves and how we know ourselves.
Right. Unfortunately, most people either think they're the last great thing that they did or the last worst thing they did, right? Oh, I did this great thing. I'm so great. Oh, I did this horrible thing. I'm so horrible. And we go back and forth between those two states of consciousness when really it's just what we're choosing to feed in that moment, right? Where we're putting energy to. Now, if we choose to put energy into ego desire more and more again, that's how we start to cover the light more and more within ourselves. If we start to then choose actions of sharing, how to go outside of ourselves, to think in a kind way, compassionate, empathetic way, then of course we peel back those layers. So at any given moment in your life, you can be a sinner and a saint. One of my favorite quotes is Oscar Wilde said, every saint has a past and every sinner has a future, because we really can change in any moment. So, but I think we have to have a healthy understanding of what ego is and what are we choosing in each day. And that's where that honesty part comes in. And that's how you become a friend to yourself. It's about in each and every day saying, okay, this is what I did today that I think was who I want to be. more like and who I want to become. And this was the part of me that really, doesn't serve me anymore. I'm going to pay attention to that and chip it away. And if you live life each day with that consciousness, again, giving yourself emotional feedback, stopping and saying, I'm really proud of that thing. I'm going to do that again. This other thing, I know I can do better. And it's not who I want to be. That's how you become the version you want. And more than that, eventually you become a version you didn't even know you could become. That's what it gets. That's when it gets really exciting, right?
Yeah. That's such a big difference, I think, between when we're talking about other spiritual paths. In many ways, whenever you want to change your life, right? Whether you go to like a business coach or a personal trainer or, somebody, it's almost like the easy way out is to just say, I'm going to listen to what you do and I'm going to wait for you to kind of guide me through it. And I think this concept of being a friend to yourself is like you can consume, you can listen, you can, all the information, but there has to be this like brass tacks of like, oh, I have this remembrance that I can proactively, me with me, look after me. And I feel like that's the part that is sort of missing a lot in the rhetoric, where your concept of being a friend to yourself is that sort of, there's a strong part of you that has to be the one that picks up the whatever you want to call it, other part of you.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's an ancient teaching that says that when we are in the womb, we are taught by the angels all the wisdom that we will ever need. And when we enter into this world, we forget it all. And the Kabbalists ask the question, well, if you're going to forget it, what's the point of learning it? And the answer is that we have every piece of wisdom, information, answer, direction that we will ever need inside. And the purpose of the spiritual path, like you said, is not about learning from somebody else. Yes, I might be inspired by somebody, but for what purpose? For discovering what's already within me. And if you really, and this I ask all the listeners to really accept that every single one of us has everything we need inside. We have all the answers, we have all the wisdom, we have all the direction. The purpose of any external studying, teacher is just how do I just rediscover that which I already know and that wisdom which I already have.
See, I think that, and it's such an important point because I think that that is an issue for a lot of people. Sometimes people go on a spiritual path. There's a famous understanding also out of 9 out of 10 who climb the spiritual ladder and try to get to a higher level of elevation, 1 in 10 actually gets there. And why is that? And I think part of the reason, again, it's hard work and it's consistent, but I think that we often don't believe in ourselves. We don't believe in our true ability. We don't realize how powerful we are. And what we do is we went from attaching ourselves to maybe what other people think, what our friends think. Then if we go on a spiritual path, we might now attach ourselves to our teacher, and then we want them to save us. It's still that kind of like external help me, feed me, grow me. For this to really transform, there has to be a moment where you come to accept that even if you don't feel powerful in that day or in that moment, to at least know that that exists within you, at least understand this spiritual truth. And from there, eventually you can get stronger in that. But I think that that's another way that people kind of think that they're changing and growing, but they're not getting the results they want because that internal part hasn't really happened.
And I think like Monica said exactly. I think one of the biggest mistakes that we all make is that we have no idea how powerful we are. And we know that consciousness is everything. So if I think that I'm this small or this big, that's all I can ever be. And what I often try to remind people, and even myself, is that whatever highest conception I have of myself, my true power is so far beyond that. And like Monica said, even if you don't experience that, feel it, just start reminding yourself of that truth, that no matter how you think of yourself today, even in your best day, your true power and strength is so far beyond that. And the only way to actually live the life that we're meant to live is by constantly reminding ourselves of how powerful we actually are.
And also to take small actions. It's one of my favorite examples. It was a TED Talk. His last name's Dudley. I can't remember his first name, but he was talking about how he was doing this job. He was dressed up as like a mascot. It was the first day at a university, and the freshmen were in line to get their information. And this girl looked really, really, really uncomfortable. And she was with her parents in line. And he could see that she was kind of anxious. And, he started to talk to her. And there was a guy in front of her. And he kind of made them talk to each other. And he was handing candy out. And she took the candy. He's like, look, your first day away from home. And you're taking candy from a stranger. And he introduced the two of them in line. And he disarmed her fears, right? He made her feel comfortable. She was going to leave that day and not even go to university. She was going to go home because she was so uncomfortable. 4 years later, she writes to him and she says, I want you to know that day, what you did, you think it was inconsequential. You literally changed my life. You made me feel comfortable. You made me laugh. I decided to stay at school. And more than that, that guy that was in line in front of me, we're getting married in a few months. Like this, and this guy was, the point of his TED Talk was, he didn't think he was doing anything. He certainly didn't think he was powerful, but we each have the ability to impact people's lives. Strangers' lives, certainly impact our own lives. But if we walk around thinking we're small and we're not able to do those things, guess what? You're going to stay small and you're not going to actually actualize that greatness within yourself. So it's not even just knowing it, it's just start acting like it, right? Start claiming it in small ways every day. And everybody goes through those moments where they do feel powerful, and then other days they don't. And that's kind of normal. That's how the spiritual system is set up, right? Because it builds more desire. Those days that you feel weak and not strong, but if you at least know this truth that you are powerful, it awakens this in you to have desire to seek it again, to make yourself feel powerful again. So there is a spiritual system there, but I think we should just make the choice that I'm not going to underestimate myself anymore. And even if it's one small thing that I can do for a person that seems like it won't change anything in the big picture, it actually does.
I think it's really difficult for a lot of people to understand when you say the words powerful because of our sort of distorted understanding of what powerful means, like power over someone or better than other people. And something that really helps me in these situations is if I'm, because the universe obviously is honoring your free will. So if you decide to say I'm not powerful, it's going to say, okay, sure, like whatever you choose in this moment. And so something that really helps me get out of my own head with the whole transforming a moment when I do feel like I feel threatened or I feel unsafe, insecure, or worried, whatever it is, it's kind of to not make it about me. I go, how would God handle this? Because I can already, we are the creator, and I can tap into that and all the qualities that the creator has and then do that myself. So it's not ascribing me as being more powerful than anybody else. It's saying, oh, I have a piece of that inside me that I can default to, and then the answer comes. But I think it's a really difficult. Powerful is been such a sort of hijacked word. I don't know if you guys have more to say on that.
Yeah, go ahead. I mean, there's the ego sense of understanding what power is, and then there's the spiritual understanding of it. The Zohar is the Kabbalistic text, and there's one verse in there that says, he who is great is small. And it's obviously not small in size, but it's small in ego, right? The greater you can become is when your ego is the most diminished, right? There's that aspect of humility. So I think power is the opposite really of what we understand it to be day to day, certainly in what we see in the world.
Yeah. And exactly, I think it's important, like you said, because there are people who want power, and in their mind, what it means, again, is either controlling others.
And also it's coming from usually a place of lack, right? Why do you feel you need to be powerful?
Yeah. And when I think of the word powerful, what I mean and what I think it means is the ability to create goodness, either for myself or for somebody else. So you can be homeless. You have the power to create goodness for another person. You can be, every one of your listeners is powerful in that way. They don't have to have one more penny in their bank account, one more position in their job. They have the power to create goodness in other people's lives and their own lives as they are right now. And I think that's probably the best understanding of the word power.
That reminds me, when you gave that example, I remember when I had ruptured my tendon and I was on crutches, and a cast. And it was just such a hard time. And I remember this one specific day, and I knew it was a really bad idea, by the way. I had to go to an appointment. I drove there. I was so hungry. I was cold. I made a cup of tea before I went. And I had to hold this hot cup of tea as I was on crutches, and I was parked across the street. So I was like, I can walk across the street with crutches and a hot cup of tea, which is actually not possible. And I attempted, and I'm burning my hand. And I see this person, and this is like kind of in the heart of COVID-ish. I mean, we were on the other side. People were out in the streets, but people were still really scared. And I asked this woman, I was like, I'm so sorry. Can you help me cross the street? She gave me the nastiest look. She was like I asked her for, I don't even know what. And then before I knew it, this unhoused person walked over. He's like, can I help you? Do you want me to hold your tea? And I was like, oh my God. Right. And that moment, like, that's not, but that's exactly, powerful. It was very powerful.
Exactly.
I was very moved. Yeah.
That's probably the best definition. I mean, you need to pin that somewhere else. We need to tattoo it. The ability to create goodness that's really what it comes down to. And it cuts away all the fluff of, power over or, thinking highly of yourself when you feel powerful and, that sort of more, whatever you want to call that idealized version of, it's almost like, there's another thing where it's like I'll only like myself when I feel that I'm at a certain part in the hierarchy almost, right? Or when I feel like I'm all doing, which none of us are all doing, but we are in our own of self, right? We can do everything that we can do. So it's never that you're taking it from or over somebody else.
Yeah, I think the idea is anything that is externally motivated is probably not coming, we'll say, from our soul, right? If I need, again, anything outside of myself, a position, an acceptance by another person or many other people, that's probably not, that's an indication that that's not the right path for me. So going back to power or control, the idea is just within myself, right? I don't need anything outside of myself to be powerful.
The most beautiful, I guess, reassurance that anyone, I think, walking on this planet would have in a world that's always bartering for us to give it some attention externally somewhere else to energize something else other than what really is your own movie, your own path. And that's what we have to focus on now, I think, more than ever, is people are more disillusioned and disenchanted with the distraction, the numbing, the putting our energy into other things. And if you always come back to that, then that's all the sort of the soothing that you need when you feel like too as you said, outwardly focused.
What I think a good kind of gauge is ask yourself, is what I am concerned about or worried about or where I want to put my energy into in this moment, is it something that's eternal, that is everlasting, that will be here long after I am not? And that's really like an easy way to kind of say, okay, I should focus on this, or this really is important, or it's not. And I even do this in parenting. When my kids might ask something and it doesn't, because often the people that you're closest to, you're like, okay, they'll understand I'm really busy, or it can wait, and I have to do this other urgent thing first. And I always stop and say, okay, what is eternal? Years and years to come, like, will they remember this moment? Will that impact them in a way that I know is life-changing, right? And it helps you navigate. Where do I want to put my energy? What's real? What's not real? So you don't fall prey to the illusions of the world. It's one of the hardest things.
Yeah, Monica speaks about this often, and it's one of, again, a very favorite topic of mine. There's actually an article maybe 10, 15 years ago by this philosopher, Gabriel Rockhill. And the title was, We Are Immortal. And he explains there that all of us live two lives. We live the life that is just for me. We eat, we sleep, we enjoy, which is great. But that's when we're no longer in this body. That great steak that I ate, which is great that you ate it, is not going to mean anything. And then there's the life that we live with and for others, right? So like Monica said, the person who I made feel better, the child that I gave joy to, and so on. That is not tied to us anymore, and that is immortal. And I think it's a really powerful way to gauge our lives. Like Monica said, what I am doing now, or at least even what's most important to me, are those the eternal things, the things that are really how I am sharing with others, how I am positively influencing others, or am I more interested in the personal stuff that's just for me, and that's not eternal, and that's mortal with every one of our bodies. I think I find it personally, and I hope listeners do find a very inspiring way to really gauge and direct our lives.
And more than that, when you live like that, then your days are fully lived, because you're tapping into something that is lasting forever. It's the thing that actually will give you ultimate joy. At the end of the day, you're going to feel like that day was lived, and then you get more days. So I was reading, and I think I'm going to make it kind of a practice to read every year, but Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And he gives this, he tells the harrowing stories of life in the camps, but this one specific day, they were woken up at dawn. It was still dark out, and their shoes were wet, and it was icy and snowy, and they're holding on to each other, and they're being pushed ahead by the end of rifles. And his friend, they're holding on to each other, they're walking. He said, "What would our wives think if they could see us now?" Because the wives were in a different concentration camp. And so right away, Viktor Frankl's mind went to his wife, right? And he started to see her face and memories of them, and the way she would comment at different things that he would say, what she thought was funny, what she corrected him about. And then he had the thought, I don't even know if she's alive right now, but it doesn't really matter, because she's alive to me, right? She is eternal. Love is eternal. And it's such a great example of really what it is. That's the kind of thing we're speaking about. So, and it reminded me of another friend, and he was sharing how his parents were immigrants, and they worked so hard, tirelessly, to give him the life he has today. And that he loves them and he owes them everything, but he doesn't have an emotional connection to them because they didn't have these moments that are eternal. Now, he didn't phrase it that way, but that was what the conversation was. He doesn't have those moments that he could go back, and if he were in a place like the concentration camp, that his mind was so full of something so beautiful with somebody that it took him to a different reality in that moment. So I just think it's such an important thing to check in with ourselves every day. Is what I'm doing now, is it eternal? And therefore, if it's not, should I be doing it?
Yeah. And it's such a simple, I think you get the answer, pretty quick, but it's almost like the bringing the awareness to it is what makes you realize, because if you're just on kind of automatic pilot, you've done something for years and years, you don't even have the ability, or you don't even give yourself the chance to say, like, hold on, do I still want this to stay around? Do I want to get rid of it now because I can? And that's where that real ability to ask those questions is so freeing, because you can go one day, oh, actually that matters to me zero, I just thought it did all this time, or everyone else seems to care about it, and so I felt like I had to as well. But the eternal thing really moves me so much, because something I've been thinking about so much recently is like, this really isn't a dress rehearsal. Like, it's really, this is the thing, this is the main movie. And it's so sad that we would go a day without that remembrance kind of dictating the day. But I think that, what, to go back to the conversation in the beginning, is that your daily experience of life should feel improved when you're doing this work properly, because you can literally just be like, I am alive. What on earth? What do you mean? Like, I have life, like there's a life today and another day, and it's not like, again, it's not like a mental thing of like making yourself be grateful, that also can help you get there, but there's a freedom and a levity behind all these practical tools that you spread so deeply and wide in the world. So, I mean, listen, I want to have you guys on 125 other times, but this was just so beautiful. And I feel like so much of it was selfish, because just your energy is just such a pleasant thing to be around always. And I want to encourage our listeners to check out your podcast. And I also want to tell them a little bit about other ways that they can connect with you. So what are your, I know the books as well, so I'll just kind of hand it over to you so that people can explore your offering so much deeper.
We have some special master classes on spirituallyhungry.life. There's one I just recorded called Rethink It Love. It's a 6-part series about love, and also the relationship you have with yourself. So very aligned with what we've talked about. 2 children's books that are out, which are great for the holidays: The Gift of Being Different, The Tale of the Other Glove, and then Rethink Love and Fear is Not an Option.
All of which are those books are life changing.
Yes. I just echo, I would recommend everybody following Monica. You can, of course, follow us on Instagram, Michael Berg, Monica Berg, our podcast, Spiritually Hungry, and many, many different books. You can find them on Amazon or on Kabbalah.com. And like I said, I always, whenever we record a podcast, my thought always is, I really, and I believe this to be true, even if just one person's life is improved, right? This has made our day, and we hope that we've inspired some, if not just one of your listeners.
And we always love talking to you, really.
Oh, well, you've inspired me, so that's already ticked the one person. Thank you guys so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jenna.
Thank you.